In part 1 of our video, we looked at the origins of Star Trek and its cast of characters. In our second video, we looked at how Star Trek was made and many of the iconic elements that defined the show.
Brain and brain!
Fascinating.
Stench.
In the final part of our Star Trek review, we'll look at the 79 episodes that make up the original series.
You're gonna trust him?
I'd say strap yourselves in, but we all know there aren't any seatbelts on the Enterprise. Growing up, Star Trek was always a thing that was present somewhere in the background. It wasn't always on, but when it was, I would generally watch it, not realising that I probably enjoyed it a lot more than similar shows the local stations would screen on a Saturday or a Sunday afternoon. You tended to see the same episodes over and over again, and it was only years later that I realised there were a whole bunch of episodes that I had never seen. It wasn't until the early 90s when, in something that I now look back on as incredibly poor value, I subscribed to getting 2 episodes on VHS tapes each month through Time Life, and after about 2 years of collecting, I had finally seen every episode. In rewatching for this video, hell, I even enjoyed some of the poorer episodes from the 3rd season. Not to say that they're suddenly good, something you've thought is crap for decades doesn't suddenly become less crap. I just enjoyed watching every episode for this review. The Man Trap was the first episode of Star Trek ever broadcast, and it was first for several reasons. It was a simple monster story without difficult to understand concepts for a new audience, and also, it was one of the few episodes that had actually been completed by September of 1966. It's not an amazing start, but it did give us a look at the science fiction favourite, an entity that appears differently to different people.
He's dead.
And it also featured another Star Trek favourite, awkwardly running into your ex.
She's not Nancy. If she were Nancy, could she take this?
Charlie X was an early show that proved Star Trek did not need to have monsters and complicated optical effects to be effective. A young man who'd grown up alone on an alien planet isn't integrating that well into the Enterprise. Charlie Evans doesn't understand social graces and etiquette and develops an unhealthy obsession with yeoman Janice Rand. Robert Walker's expression when using his powers, accompanied by a musical sting provided by Alexander Courage, showed us a little of the potential of Star Trek. The crew members disappearing or the woman with no face were burned into my consciousness when this episode seemed to be repeated every 3rd Sunday. The second pilot, while featuring a number of differences in cast and uniforms, is close enough to the series that it only needed a few editing changes to make it sit better with the shows made later. Guest stars Sally Kellerman, who would later appear in the movie MASH, and Gary Lockwood, who likewise would appear in 2001 A Space Odyssey, but had also starred in Roddenberry's earlier series The Lieutenant. This is a great showcase for Captain Kirk, where he has to work out what to do with his old friend, who has now acquired the powers of a god. It's a bit like if your apprentice won the lottery, then bought out your company, so now you're getting them coffee. Unlike the sugar-frenzy Spock of the original pilot, here Spock is a much less cheerful character, logical, but also for some reason really eager for Kirk to kill his superpowered friend.
Kill Mitchell while you still can.
A virus lowers the crew's inhibitions, letting Sulu run amok through the corridors with a fencing blade. Spock acknowledges his conflicted emotions.
My mother, I could never tell her I loved her.
And Kirk is afraid of losing his one true love, the Enterprise. Meanwhile, Scotty, a man with a high tolerance for alcohol, is one of the few crew members unaffected, possibly because he's always drunk on duty anyway. The original concept for this was to be the first part of a 2-parter, as the climax ends with the Enterprise accidentally travelling back in time. A transporter accident splits Kirk into 2 men, one with the intellect and sensitivity, and the second, cunning and grimacing. Evil Kirk attacks Janice Rand, while good Kirk has turned into a wimp. Kirk needs both parts of him reintegrated or else he will die. Meanwhile, a poor landing party is stuck on the planet with no way back until they can be certain that the transporters are now working properly. Sulu takes it well, cracking jokes, and every fan who's seen this can yell at the screen, "Why the hell don't they take a shuttlecraft?" The answer was, at the time, they didn't yet have one. Space conman Harry Mudd is a space pimp looking to offload space hookers to space miners in space.
Unusual reading on male board members. Detecting high respiration patterns, perspiration rates up, heartbeat rapid, blood pressure higher than normal.
Harry Mudd was what every show needed, a not particularly evil antagonist, but one who leaves chaos in his wake, like Auntie Beryl that one time when we ran out of eggnog.
Captain James Kirk. The next orders you're taking will be given by Harcourt, Fenton, Mudd.
Harry Mudd is not entirely a rogue, but he's not remotely trustworthy, like when you buy a movie prop online that comes with a certificate of authenticity. Another double of Kirk, this time it's an android. Christine Chappell's long-missing fiancé has made robots of his friends, including a shapely female robot, but curiously not a robot version of his fiancée Christine. Awkward. Not the greatest episode, but it does have this amazing scene where Kirk, looking for a weapon, subconsciously selects the most phallic-looking stalactite he can find. The Enterprise finds a planet that looks exactly like Earth. Let's go where no man has gone before. But if it looks exactly like home, what was the point? They find an M-class planet, Earth-type conditions, except here the civilization seemed to die out in their equivalent of the 20th century. There are no adults but children alive, but only until they reach puberty. These kids are also highly irritating, like a onesie riddled with bedbugs. Here we see how the roles originally written for Janice Rand were recast with the Girl of the Week to make Kirk's relationship seem somewhat less creepy, even in 1960s terms. A psychiatric hospital has a machine that can possibly cure the mentally ill, or it can turn them into mental vegetables faster than Facebook. This episode features Spock's first use of a mind meld. He's reluctant to use it as it's a deeply personal thing to Vulcans. Of course, he soon gets over that, mind melding with all and sundry as a means to communicate.
Our minds sharing the same thoughts.
The Corbomite maneuver is one of those instant classics. The Enterprise encounters a massive vessel headed by Barlock, who insists he will destroy the Enterprise. Kirk has to deal with a navigator falling to pieces faster than a bottle of champagne made from Lego dropped from the second story onto a concrete floor.
Not chess, Mr. Spock. Poker.
Kirk's last gambit to avoid destruction? Bullshit.
Earth vessels have had incorporated into them a substance known as Corbomite.
This is another episode that seemed to be rerun almost every few weeks in the early 80s. One I always remembered for Clint Howard as the real Barlock, who at this time hadn't moved to exclusively appearing in movies directed by his brother Ron Howard.
This is Tranya. I hope you relish it as much as I.
Spock steals the Enterprise in order to transport the heavily injured first captain of the Enterprise, Captain Christopher Pike, to the forbidden planet Talos IV. He's caught and uses mysterious footage from 13 years previously to defend his actions in a court-martial. The production of Star Trek's first season was not going well in terms of actually completing episodes. Opticals for some stories were taking months at a time, and the series was in danger of missing delivery dates. Roddenberry wanted to use the expensive and unbroadcast original pilot, The Cage, and so he created a wrapper plot that could be made cheaply and quickly. Look, does anyone have eye drops for Vina? She's clearly got something in her eye. With new footage filmed in only a few days, the show gave Desilu 2 extra episodes breathing room and helped balance the show's budget. These are also 2 of the better episodes, with Menagerie and The Cage being Gene Roddenberry's best work on a full script in the series. But, you win some, you lose some. The actor Caridian might also be the mass murderer Kodos. But first, Kirk flirts with Caridian's daughter. Business before business. It's not a great episode. Rather theatrical, like the office manager who insists everyone in the office attends her cat's birthday party. Balance of Terror is a riff on submarine movies, with the Enterprise hunting the Romulan warbird that's been attacking Federation outposts along the neutral zone between the Federation and the Romulan Empire. This is our first look at the Federation's most implacable foes. Foes so implacable that no human has actually ever seen one until the Enterprise hacks into the warbird's CCTV for dramatic effect. Oh no, the Romulans look like Vulcans, which really isn't ideal since this episode's navigator really hates Romulans. It's also a prescient warning to enable 2-factor authentication for anyone who's just installed web-enabled security cameras. A wedding on board the Enterprise is cancelled when the groom is killed during the skirmish with the Romulans. The bride-to-be, or the bride that would have been, is sad because she lost not only the love of her life, but also her deposit on hiring out the Enterprise chapel because of the bullshit restocking fee. But not to worry, because she bounces back pretty quickly. The Enterprise investigates a planet where things the crew had been thinking of suddenly appear. And their thoughts are, let's just say, restrained. McCoy is killed.
My personal friend is dead.
Kirk sees an old love, plus gets to settle the score with a bully from his days at the academy. Some people love the episode. For me it's sort of okay, middle of the pack.
What the doctor ordered, Jim.
A shuttlecraft finally appears, courtesy of model kit makers AMT paying for the prop to be made. The Galileo craft makes a forced landing, and Kirk will soon have to abandon the search for his missing crew thanks to a Federation official overruling him. Spock's use of pure logic to handle the situation rubs the crew of the Galileo the wrong way, like getting a massage from the Incredible Hulk. Faced with death and no way to alert the Enterprise to their whereabouts, Spock does something illogical out of sheer desperation.
It's like sending up a flare. That was a good gamble. Perhaps it was worth it.
I went out there to see it.
I like this episode, but some say this episode's mistake was to separate Kirk from Spock and McCoy. This is a great episode that builds on the love-hate relationship between Spock and McCoy. McCoy gets in his hits, despite the fact they may all die. Spock's position is like trying to fix a punctured tyre on a bike while somebody's shoving hot needles in your thighs. Trelane discovers the Enterprise and, as an almost omnipotent being, is delighted to find new playthings. Of course, Kirk is not amused. Star Trek loved its beings with godlike powers to amp up the jeopardy of the plots. When you know you can't beat them physically, maybe you can reason with them.
This is better than I'd planned.
But for the second time this season, the god is basically put in their place by parental types. Star Trek was never one to leave a good plot idea alone, and of course Trelane does seem the basis for Q in Star Trek The Next Generation. You know, I don't know how I can keep hold of all of these classic episodes in a row. Kirk has to face off against the captain of an alien vessel that apparently destroyed a Federation outpost. Aliens, no, scratch that, godlike aliens, have set up a trial by combat rather than have the two ships destroyed within their sphere of influence. Kirk can't beat the Gorn by force, but apparently it is all he needs to make a weapon. So Kirk finds the ingredients to make gunpowder, some diamonds and some bamboo, and builds a crude cannon. Of course, if he wasn't in such a hurry and just looked under those rocks over there to the left, he would have found an M16 with armor-piercing rounds. Oh well. Kirk of course prevails, but in a nod to Star Trek not being a bloodthirsty show, Kirk spares the Gorn, since it is possible that the human outpost had been set up in Gorn territory. Thrown back in time, the Enterprise picks up a US Air Force pilot investigating a UFO. It's a lighter episode, but a good one. The stakes are just high enough and the humour pitched correctly, like Celine Dion at karaoke. This one's also like Celine Dion at karaoke, but in this case the episode just goes on and on and on. Kirk has to defend himself after evidence points to Kirk murdering his friend. It's not a great story, but it does at least teach us how to spell court-martial. Kirk finds an old flame, again, but this time she's prosecuting the case against him. Meanwhile, Kirk is represented by this guy, possibly Henri Toulouse-Lautrec, a lawyer who lines up outside the bank first thing on Monday morning to get out $65 in cash so he can walk over to T-Mobile and pay his cell phone bill. Every now and then you'll notice certain things crop up again and again, and often in the not great episodes. On a seemingly sedate planet, a purge-like witching hour has hit and people go nuts as if their sports team had either won a final or lost a final. It doesn't really matter. Here is not a great episode where we have A, a planet that looks like Earth, B, a computer that has enslaved the populace, C, Sulu is possessed, and D, Kirk beats the computer by giving it a ridiculously simple problem, causing it to assert. So let's see if we can get our phone to self-destruct. Hey Siri, if I said I had 3 arms but only needed 2 gloves, 4 legs but only needed 2 shoes, 5 ears but only needed 1 pair of headphones, and 6 eyes yet only needed 1 monocle, what would I be?
Well, obviously the answer is a fucking moron.
Return of the Archons does feature the very first mention of the Federation's non-interference rule, the Prime Directive, which either enhances drama or completely kills it, depending on the episode.
I fucking hate this job.
The Enterprise rescues a sleeper ship full of eugenics wars criminals led by Khan.
It would be most effective if you would cut the carotid artery.
Even without the later film sequel, it's a great episode with a fantastic performance by Ricardo Montalban.
Khan is my name.
Khan, like pretty much every other visitor to the Enterprise, manages to take over the ship, helped by the historian Marla McIvers, who apparently only has to catch a whiff of the perspiration on Khan's musky ballsack in order to throw away her career. There's drama, romance, mask of course, a fist fight between two stuntmen where Kirk only wins by beating Khan down with a caulking gun. It's an all-round classic.
I never forget a face. Mr. Chekov.
Okay, so we'll overlook the fact that Chekov is nowhere to be seen in this episode. It doesn't mean he wasn't on board, but it doesn't not mean he wasn't not on board when he might have been on board but not on duty, unless he was off duty and not on board, but still. Star Trek was a show where the villain of the story often didn't end up dead. In the days of episodic television that rarely called back to previous episodes, this was rarely a problem. However, stranding Khan and his followers on a new world would later backfire big time. When a later Star Trek feature film needed a strong villain, Khan was the obvious choice. You can tell they were getting into a rhythm later in the first season with more and more high-concept shows that told stories that few other shows could get away with. Here, a planet is at war with its neighbour, but conducted via computer, almost like esports. But here, people declared casualties by the computer have to report to a disintegration chamber.
They go in, but they do not come out.
It's an otherwise fun but relatively ordinary show, which ends by Kirk more or less causing a real conflict, in an attempt to force the two planets to negotiate an end to their conflict. Attacked by spores that control the mind,
Spores?
Spock finds love with an old friend, Jill Ireland. Though I'd totally fail to see why the spores were necessary. Kirk finds himself unable to give in to the spores' control when the rest of the crew have abandoned the ship, and rather than let them all be happy, Kirk rains on their parade. It's a bit like when your neighbour calls the cops to complain about the noise because you're saying happy birthday at your kid's 5th birthday party. A mining colony is under attack from a subterranean creature and Kirk must deal with it. And guess what? The creature isn't a mindless creature destroying for no reason, but is in fact protecting its young. Writer-producer Gene Kuhn was able to turn what looked like a monster story into something with a little more sensitivity. It built on Star Trek's ethos, one where every creature wasn't necessarily a monster to be destroyed. The episode ends with Kirk and Spock finding a way for peaceful cohabitation between the miners and the Horta creature. A bit like iPhone users and Android users living in harmony, so long as they don't group chat.
I'm delighted to hear that, Chief.
Kirk and Spock attempt to convince the simple people of Organia that the Klingons pose a threat to their way of life. The Klingons here are depicted a lot more restrained as they would be in later appearances, where they became fairly thuggish. The makeup was generally limited to facial hair and making the Klingon troops look like they'd paid for the full 2 hours at the tanning salon. The Organians proved to be another all-powerful race having powers far beyond those of mere mortals. It's a simple and solid episode that sets up one of Trek's most enduring races. First they're enemies, then they're friends, then they're frenemies, then they're, well, you know, it's complicated.
Well, Commander, I guess that takes care of the war.
A shame, Captain. It would have been glorious.
If you want to look for the first season's most obvious stinker with little to redeem it, this is it. It's an impenetrable story, rewritten several times without ever making it better. An interracial romance subplot was removed after network jitters. Production seemed more low effort than you'd expect. The original guest star having to be recast at the last minute. And it all just leaves us with a show that's more confusing than a jump cut to
I have confidence in sunshine.
Wow, see, that's how confusing it was. If ever there was an episode this season where everything just went wrong, this is surely it. It's a confusing mess, like a sandwich with ham, jam, cheese, Reese's Pieces, tomato and toffee. Hold the mayo, please. A crazed Dr McCoy has changed history and Jim and Spock have to put things right. But to do so will put a crimp on Kirk's plans for Saturday night. City on the Edge of Forever has garnered a reputation as the finest episode of Trek ever. One of the few with a downbeat ending and utterly gorgeous in every way.
I'm in love with Edith Keeler.
Jim, Edith Keeler must die.
Joan Collins as the 30s era missionary proves to be one of Kirk's 1,500 soulmates. It's humorous.
He caught his head in a mechanical rice picker.
More than a little melodramatic.
Murderers! Assassins!
And heartbreaking.
Do you know what you just did? He knows, Doctor.
Only a few Trek episodes throughout its history have come close to this sense of the captain having to make such a heart-wrenching decision. He can marry Joan Collins and destroy the future, sleep with Joan Collins and probably destroy the future, or let her get hit by a truck and call it a day. City on the Edge of Forever went through several rewrites in order to make it a show that could be made on the show's budget and to keep the characters consistent, but that didn't stop writer Harlan Ellison from waging a decades-long feud over the rewrites with basically everyone. This episode shows that while Star Trek's cast was stacked with good actors, when scripts allowed, DeForest Kelley could act them all off the screen.
Just had to cut, sew people like garments, needles and sutures.
Operation Annihilate was a cool-sounding title in search of a story that wasn't as disappointing as a bacon, durian and tomato sandwich. Mass insanity is sweeping planets along a certain course. Some creatures that, through parallel development, look very similar to plastic vomit sold in joke stores, attack Spock, and then the episode grinds to a halt, becoming a mediocre medical drama set in sickbay. As a season finale, it has about as much spark as someone trying to light a fire by rubbing together 2 sticks of chewing gum.
I'm also quite blind.
Every 7 years, Vulcans need to find a mate. As presented here and heavily implied, but not explained in any great detail, not even using a public information film with diagrams, Spock needs to get laid or his balls will explode. And everyone seems most understanding. I mean, it's believable because it's Spock. He's Vulcan. Who's to say his balls won't explode? Look, it's not like Vulcans only mate every 7 years, but every 7 years they absolutely have to. It's a deeply private and personal thing. Until Spock meets some random chick living in a cloud city.
You only take a mate once every 7 years.
Spock returns to Vulcan intending to marry the woman he's been betrothed to since childhood, finds she has another fella on the side, and for various reasons, ends up in a fight to the death with Captain Kirk. Amok Time is an absolute classic, and of course has that music. It's our only look at Vulcan during the original series, and the first use of the hand salute and the catchphrase synonymous with both Vulcans and very old billionaires.
Live long and prosper, Spock.
A giant green hand holds the Enterprise in space, and a being claiming to be Apollo just wants some people to stick around and worship him. He does this with, you guessed it, godlike powers, rather than an Instagram account. But at least he's not plucking medical advice out of a bucket of shit and trying to sell you health supplements. Scotty, trying to defend the honour of a young woman he's got his eye on, gets his ass handed to him by Apollo. It's an okay episode, more memorable for its visuals than anything else. Have you seen Star Trek the Motion Picture? Yes? Well, that's basically this episode, where a coffee urn takes over the Enterprise. Nomad initially confuses Kirk with his creator, kills Scotty and wipes Uhura's memory. Mirror Mirror saw Kirk, Scotty, Uhura and Dr McCoy transported to a parallel universe where everyone seems to be in a permanently bad mood, like someone who keeps stubbing their pinky toe into the corner of a desk. In this universe, the Federation is belligerent and militaristic, not unlike how the Klingon Empire was portrayed in later series. Promotions are achieved by assassination, the captain has a device that will make people vanish forever, and Spock has a goatee, forever dooming everybody who comes back from a holiday with a new beard to be cast as the evil twin.
Do you think we should destroy the Hawkins?
Terror must be maintained or the Empire is doomed.
It's a great episode, but a rare one which lets the entire cast do good work. The Apple is a show with another simple tribe kept primitive by a computer. The primitives are taller than usual Oompa Loompas with ridiculous hair, not blessed with intelligence or education. Their every needs are met by their computer overlord Val, so they never need to think. Even when it's time to make replacements, they need an educational film. Even the Enterprise crew are too coy to explain how procreation works. This episode has one of the highest body counts among red shirts. Still, Chekov isn't about to let the tragic death of his shipmates only minutes earlier put a crimp on him making moves on a yeoman.
Love. Strange words. Children, love. What is love?
Love is...
Also, that's David Soul, who'd later star in Starsky and Hutch. The Doomsday Machine saw the Enterprise discover the remnants of a sister ship, the USS Constellation, and the ship is almost destroyed by a giant cream horn that can destroy a planet. Commodore Decker was the only survivor of the Constellation after its run-in with the Planet Killer and commandeers the Enterprise to avenge his crew. Another story burned into my brain like a head-mounted laser pointing the wrong way. The Constellation was the first use of the Enterprise model kit in the show. While the opticals meant it wasn't a cheap show to make, it was also one of the quickest to film. Unlike The Menagerie, this was a complete episode, not repurposing footage from elsewhere. The universe needs to keep in perfect harmony and balance. So does Star Trek. So after a great episode, invariably comes a not great episode. Cat's Paw was designed as a Halloween episode, with a giant cat, old school ghostly manifestations, and of course, for whatever reason, marionettes made from pipe cleaners. Actually, what is to love? Very little. It's ordinary and out of place, incredibly mediocre. Star Trek doing an outright comedy episode was a real possibility with producer Gene Kuhn at the helm.
Why should we leave you?
Because we don't like you. No.
This one was made while Gene Roddenberry was away from the office for a time. iMudd saw the return of Harry Mudd, this time as a ruler of a planet of androids who indulge his every whim. It could have been terrible, but it's also very funny without the tongue-in-cheek aspects undercutting the series' usual drama. Using logic to defeat a computer was done to death on Star Trek, even by this point, but confusing the androids through absurdity has some of the funniest scenes in any Star Trek.
Scotty's dead. He had too much happiness.
You wouldn't want every episode to be like this, but I'm glad this one exists. William Shatner is a natural comedian, but Star Trek only gave him a few opportunities to display his comedic timing, all of which were produced by Gene Kuhn. Of course, when the great bird came back to the office, he was not pleased. Well, a giant energy field has kept the inventor of warp technology, Zefram Cochrane, alive for decades after he'd been declared dead. But he's getting a mite lonely, and the energy field known as the Companion waylays a shuttlecraft with Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and a seriously ill Federation official. Turns out the sexy energy field has caught a case of the Zephrams. Metamorphosis felt like a template of how more intimate stories could be told, lessons that were totally ignored by the show's producers the following season. The Enterprise ferries delegates to a conference, and Spock is given the cold shoulder by the Vulcan ambassador.
Sarek and his wife are my parents.
Spock and his father aren't on the best of terms, leading to emotional outbursts like this one.
I prefer another guy.
Or this one.
He chose to devote his knowledge to Starfleet.
Or this one.
It would seem the only answer.
Vulcan arguments are legendarily long-lived and prosper because nobody is ever willing to give way. Vulcans are like lawyers who insist on fighting the most minuscule traffic violation in court. Sure, the fine was for $80 and the court cost will be in the thousands, but when there's a principle at stake, why compromise?
Most unusual.
Vulcan disagreements are free of emotion, yet somehow they still look like petty grudges to everyone else. Spock's father, Sarek, who in the habit of a lifetime would be ill in service of the plot. Here he needs a transfusion from Spock, just when Kirk is incapacitated, and there's the dilemma for the ship's first officer. Does he take charge of the ship during an emergency, or save his father, who wouldn't even say hello to him a few scenes earlier? And DeForest Kelley has trouble pronouncing Sarek's name.
Mrs. Sarek.
Spare a thought for Spock's mum. Amanda was a human woman with a Vulcan husband and a half-Vulcan son. As a mother without the ability to use guilt, winning an argument at home would be tricky. The Klingons and Federation are again vying for power over a strategically important primitive planet. Julie Newmar is the wife of the dead ruler and doesn't want to be killed by his replacement. As such, she's not really interested in what happens to her dead husband's child, delivered by McCoy. As an episode, it's just The Klingon accountant here was the least interesting Klingon we would ever see in the original series. An old sci-fi chestnut roasted on an open fire is the episode where people start aging. Kirk, McCoy, Scotty and Spock all start aging at an accelerated rate, like rewinding a VHS copy of Benjamin Button.
Blasted machine, Spock. You can't argue with a machine.
The makeup effects for a TV budget in the 60s are pretty decent and gave the cast a bit of real acting to do. Of course, there's a Starfleet superior on board ready to take charge during an emergency and, of course, balls everything up. Obsession is one of those episodes that if you watch it, it's sort of semi-watchable, but then once it's over, you'll think you've suffered a blackout for the previous 50 minutes. It's only after the brain scans come back negative that you remember that you'd watched this episode about a killer gas cloud that Kirk had encountered years ago, which suddenly returns.
It must be destroyed.
Kirk is obsessed with his personal failure to stop the creature back in the day. It's one of those times where Captain Kirk keeps his cards close to his chest, with McCoy and Spock both becoming concerned over the captain's possibly irrational behaviour.
Shatner, you there?
It's written by Robert Bloch, who, aside from having written several Star Trek episodes, had written the novel Psycho, but this is his most horrific Trek story. Is Scotty murdering women on a hedonistic planet? The answer is maybe, but it turns out that a murderous entity known as Redjack has blazed a trail of carnage across the galaxy. A trail that along the way stopped off in Victorian London for a while, where, yes, it was also known as Jack the Ripper. The Ripper legends had fascinated movie makers for years, so it popping up in Trek is not all that unexpected. Wolf in the Fold is a fairly nasty episode in general. It's not a bad episode, just a bit gross. Young writer David Gerald had submitted scripts that the producers liked but needed work, so a lot of time went into the writing and rewriting of what would become one of the series' all-time classics. The Klingons and Kirk stand off against each other on the space station K7, ostensibly sparring over territorial concerns, while at the same time Kirk must guard an important grain consignment. But a space trader is selling cute furball creatures called Tribbles.
Trilling seems to have a tranquilizing effect on the human nervous system. Fortunately, of course, I am immune to...
The Tribbles do very little but eat and make more Tribbles.
It seems they're bisexual, reproducing at will.
Well, there's some unsubscribes. It's a story that's really all about the comedy, but it's done so well you don't feel Star Trek going down the path of chasing Batman 66. Gene Roddenberry hated episodes like this, but Trouble with Tribbles is often cited as one of the most beloved episodes of the original series.
They also compared you with that Danubian slime devil.
I see.
And then they said that you were...
I get the picture, Scotty.
In the 90s, Deep Space Nine paid tribute to the episode by having its characters revisit the events of the episode as a way to celebrate the show's 30th anniversary.
Who started the fight?
I don't know, sir.
Some aliens kidnap Kirk, Uhura and Chekov and force them to fight in gladiatorial combat for their amusement. Kirk, in another shirtless Shatner showcase, uses his masculine wiles to convince his drill instructor to help him beat the aliens, which it turns out are bored disembodied brains in jars. Look, I know if I was stuck in a jar all day, I'd probably want to see Captain Kirk get the shit beaten out of him too.
400 Quatloos against the newcomers.
More comedy abounds when a book about Chicago's gangsters of the 30s that was left behind on a planet of highly imitative people somehow becomes the Bible for that society. Kirk has to try and undo the damage done to this society, but instead buries himself in the role.
Maybe we'll cut you in for a piece of the action.
A minuscule, a very small piece.
A giant single-cell organism threatens everything, and McCoy and Spock bicker over who would heroically martyr themselves in the name of science. It's as interesting as it sounds, or as uninteresting as it sounds, whatever floats your boat. A story of Klingons and the Federation using primitive tribes to fight each other in a proxy war. It's about as subtle as using mineral turpentine as a mouthwash. Or do I have to spell it out in large letters in a clear, easy-to-read font? I do? Vietnam, Vietnam, Vietnam. Kirk is put under a spell by an alluring witch doctor who wants to acquire Federation weapons for her husband's tribe. The Klingons have been providing another tribe with basic firearms, and Kirk's dilemma is whether to provide similar weapons to his friend in order to maintain a balance of power. The best bit is the monster, the Mugatu, which in the script is Gumato, but since DeForest Kelley couldn't pronounce the word properly, it became Mugatu.
A Mugatu attacked him.
This is a fairly ordinary episode. A trio of alien consciousnesses from a dead civilization want to borrow 3 bodies for a while so they can build themselves humanoid bodies. This episode features Kirk's famous speech, or infamous speech, where he talks about his favourite board game.
Risk. Risk is our business.
Diana Muldaur also makes her first appearance in Star Trek.
I don't know, Mr. Shatner. Don't you have other guys around to do this?
It's not a Star Trek convention, but a planet where Federation advisors use the Third Reich as a template for efficiency, which the natives have taken to mean, hey, let's do the whole Nazi shitbag routine properly.
Dr. McCoy is having difficulty with that uniform, sir.
Well, send them down naked if you have to. Kirk out.
It's true. I only half believe what you said.
It's not an amazing episode, but as a child it was always memorable to see Shatner and Nimoy cavorting in Nazi regalia. It's rather ordinary in the first half, but quite fun towards the end. Aliens from another galaxy have taken human form as part of an advanced alien invasion scouting force. They take over the Enterprise with a view to using it to head back home, but the journey will take 300 years, which sounds pretty bad, but even worse because Chekov had just set up an automatic renewal on his car insurance. As the aliens are unfamiliar with their new human form,
that's green.
Kirk decides to use their new emotions against them.
Is there some significance to this action?
Of course, this is the show where the bulk of the crew are compressed into small shapes to avoid dealing with the problem of what to do with the surplus crew. Also, actress Barbara Boucher would later become a star of European cinema. The thing about Gene Roddenberry was, after he had created the beauty that was Star Trek, his actual scripts often left more than a little to be desired. Here, the Enterprise finds, guess what, an abandoned Constitution-class ship orbiting a planet, while on the surface a starship captain is trying to influence a local war with phasers. The Yangs and Combs are an analogy, and not a subtle one. Vietnam. Like selling counterfeit luxury handbags labelled as Moochie. Having this parallel culture also having developed a constitution with the exact same wording as the US Constitution is as likely as a planet filled with aspiring actors who all open restaurants so they can wait tables in between gigs. Kirk is confronted by the M5 computer, which by the time you see this may or may not be the chip in your laptop. Ordered to take part in a test of a computer that can run a starship with only 20 crew members, Kirk has to sit back and watch as a machine angles for his job. Of course, the machine is insane and attacks other starships during a wargame simulation. It's like when you go paintballing and some idiot brings a Glock. Though, to carry the analogy further, here the Glock owner fumbles and blows off his left testicle.
Relax, Mr. Shatner, you'll just mess up your stomach again.
Bread and Circus is one of those episodes that as a kid stuck out at you, but as an adult just seems to be such an ordinary idea. A planet where the Roman Empire was still a thing in the mid-60s. Not a parallel universe version of Earth, just a planet that happened to quite independently come up with a Roman Empire identical to that of Earth. As a concept, it's a bit on the nose, like the giant zit on your nose. But, you know, it's still a fun show that also takes a satirical look at television.
You bring this network's ratings down, Flavius, and we'll do a special on you.
Even in the 1960s, it was not uncommon for a successful show to spin off another series. Gene Roddenberry had been pitching an idea for a new show when a similar concept was being shopped around by writer Art Wallace. The two then collaborated on a new idea that would be fleshed out in what would be the closing episode of Star Trek's second season as what they called a backdoor pilot. A little class, please. Assignment Earth saw the Enterprise casually travelling back in time to witness a difficult time in Earth's history. Whereupon they intercept a human being transported to Earth. Gary 7 was taken by aliens and trained up as an agent before being sent back to protect Earth, along with a ditzy secretary played by Terry Garr.
Oh my gosh.
And a cat named Isis who also turns into a woman. It's weird to see Shatner and Nimoy relegated to second fiddle in the series, basically turning them into Sulu and Chekov.
I have never felt so helpless.
And there's very little about the endeavour that seems like it would have made an exciting series had it been picked up. It has all the hallmarks of a spin-off, right down to this scene at the end.
Mr. Seven and Miss Lincoln have some interesting experiences in store for them.
Which in the case of shows that didn't go ahead, seems like the kiss of death.
Stop it! Stop it!
Aliens have stolen Spock's brain. What? Seriously? You're shitting me.
His brain is gone.
Oh well. Kirk and company must retrieve the brain while zombie Spock tags along. Spock's brain is being used to run a civilization of go-go dancers and giant oafs. Spock's brain, long derided as one of the worst episodes of Star Trek ever, was the season opener of the third season and won its time slot, beating out the competition, the 2-hour pilot of Hawaii Five-0, which was just about to begin its 12-season run. And it was written by Gene Coon. In return for getting out of his contract, Gene Coon had agreed to write several episodes for the third season, though he did so under the pen name Lee Cronin, since he was technically moonlighting from his day job, working on the series It Takes a Thief. Spock's brain is bad, but the cast played this absolutely straight. The idea sounds silly at first, but as the first heart transplants had just taken place, it seemed a logical extrapolation.
Just want to talk to somebody about Spock's brain, that's all.
Brain and brain! What is brain?
Of course, by now it was being made without Gene Coon's light touch. As such, it's played deathly seriously. I can't hate it. It's a bit like lounging in a wading pool filled with gin.
I know that does not make much sense.
Kirk may have gone mad and taken the Enterprise into the neutral zone, where the Enterprise is surrounded by 3 Romulan ships. Or are they Klingon ships? No, they're Romulan ships.
Intelligence reports Romulans now using Klingon design.
Spock uses the Vulcan death grip on Kirk.
Captain is dead.
And tries to romance the Romulan commander. Meanwhile, Kirk is not actually dead, gets surgically altered to look like a Romulan by McCoy, so that Kirk can travel back to the ship and steal a Romulan cloaking device. The third season only very occasionally presented allegorical stories. This episode was based on what was known at the time as the Pueblo Incident, which was still an ongoing situation. The episode was given priority in production in order to get it on air while it was still topical. I really rather enjoy this episode. It showed that the third season didn't necessarily have to become the utter crap that we would know it to be.
Both painful and unpleasant. I believe the details are unnecessary.
Kirk loses his memory on a planet with a transplanted Native American tribe that's got an asteroid on a trajectory to flatten the planet, and there's no Bruce Willis around. Struggling to remember who he is, Kirk marries, becomes the tribe's medicine man, and is about to have a child when mother and unborn child are killed because, well, Kirk can't have nice things. This was the only story of the season afforded a location shoot. By this time the budget had been slashed so low, we couldn't have nice things. Some people might call Spock's brain the worst Star Trek, but it's at least fun in a very, very trashy way. And The Children Shall Lead is just pure trash.
There are unpleasant surprises as well as pleasant ones.
Some children are influenced by an alien creature, Gorgon, who is played not by a noted actor or even an unnoted actor. Hell, I'd settle for an extra who's just had surgery to have their wisdom teeth removed.
We have reached a moment of crisis.
But a celebrity attorney, Melvin Belli. Original Star Trek had almost avoided stunt casting up until this point. Nowadays, you just look at this fool and think, Jesus, he's not very good, is he? To reiterate, this is a really, really bad episode of Star Trek, whatever the hell you think of later series. Is There in Truth No Beauty is a relatively simple story about an accomplished woman who, because this is the 1960s, is hysterically jealous and paranoid that Spock will take her job. She studied on Vulcan and is to work with Ambassador Kolos, who's so ugly that he will drive people mad if anyone sees him. Diana Muldaur makes her second appearance in Trek here. She would of course go on to play Dr. Pulaski for one season of Star Trek The Next Generation. By this time, Gene Roddenberry had distanced himself from Star Trek.
I simply cannot love you the way you want me to.
The cast were quite surprised when a new draft appeared, apparently from Gene Roddenberry, which added dialogue that amounted to an extended advertisement for a Vulcan pendant that Gene Roddenberry had intended to market. Roddenberry had a hobby of polishing semi-precious stones. No, that's not a euphemism, he really liked to make jewellery.
I was just noticing your Vulcan Idic, Mr. Spock.
In the episode, Spock suddenly wears something called an Idic medallion, which stands for the Vulcan philosophy of infinite diversity, infinite combinations. Filming on the episodes was halted for a time when there was significant pushback from the cast, who felt shilling for Roddenberry's side hustle would cheapen the show. There's no linkage, but at the time Leonard Nimoy had already released several albums trading on his Spock persona, including his infamous Bilbo Baggins song, and William Shatner would release his spoken word opus, The Transformed Man, during the third season.
Didn't someone try and talk you out of it?
Shatner emoting while reciting the lyrics to Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds is quite something to behold.
Dr. Shatner.
Sorry, but Shatner's not the one wanted by the police.
Aliens, sick to the teeth of people encroaching on their space, decide to teach the Enterprise crew a lesson by using their own violent history against them. They choose to set up Kirk and company as the losing Clanton gang at the gunfight at the OK Corral. With money tight, the production opted for a stylized look to the episode, which you either buy or you don't. You either like the episode or you hate it. I happen to think it's great, one of the better episodes of the season. Again, it was written by former producer Gene Kuhn under a pseudonym. After rescuing a group of stranded Klingons who believe their ship was destroyed by humans, it becomes apparent that something is manipulating them all into fighting each other. On board the Enterprise, an alien entity that feeds off negative emotion, like Facebook. Seeing Klingons and humans in pitched battles with swords is a lot of fun.
Klingons kill for their own purposes.
A hollow asteroid holds a civilization who have no idea that they're in a hollow asteroid. They have even less idea that they're in a hollow asteroid on course to collide with the planet in a year. Meanwhile, McCoy has revealed he is also dying in a year. He falls in love with a woman on the asteroid and, well, it's not a terrible nor a great episode. McCoy was due for some lovin', but it's just a pity that we never heard him say, "I'm a doctor, not a lover." Star Trek has always had flowery or poetic episode titles. I mean, it beats Season 1, Episode 3, or the one with the furry things. For the World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky is the floweriest and most lyrical title of any Trek, and bordering on pretentious. But it's a rare episode that gave DeForest Kelley something more to do than go on an anti-Vulcan diatribe.
For the world is hollow, and I have
touch the sky.
Thank you. We'll let you know.
2 college students got together and said, hey, why don't we put on a show? The Tholian web saw the Enterprise investigating, what else, an abandoned Constitution-class ship. Kirk is lost to interphase. The Tholians turn up, berate the Enterprise for intruding on their space, and very slowly knit an impenetrable web around the ship. The Tholian web is a pretty good story for any season of Star Trek, and the lack of Captain Kirk gives the rest of the cast a chance to do more than just simply parrot instrument readings back to the captain. There are many contenders for the very worst episode of Star Trek. Plato's Stepchildren is surely vying for pole position. Some people who, for reasons, consider themselves related to the ancient Athenian philosopher Plato are idle but powerful, yet able to be killed by a simple infection. They intend to keep Dr McCoy around just in case someone has a hangnail or a boil on their ass, and then we are subjected to long, interminable scenes of the aliens trying to coerce McCoy into staying. Their method of persuasion, torturing Spock and Captain Kirk. Plato's Stepchildren was apparently the first episode of American television to feature an interracial kiss. Oh, shocking. Well, not that shocking. We'd already seen the Vulcan Spock kissing humans and Kirk kissing various aliens all over the shop. And of course, the companion. Aliens taking over the Enterprise, natch. But the kink here is that they move so fast you can't see them. I mean, if they sat on a chair to take a breather, could you see them? If they took a nap, would they become visible? It's a fun enough episode, especially when Spock speeds up to try and find Captain Kirk. Another episode of torture porn, and not good torture porn. The poor actress playing the mute empath Gem has to overplay facial expressions to try and get some mileage from a really dull and forgettable episode. Elan of Troyes is taming of the shrew by way of Helen of Troy in space. Tasked with transporting the bratty dolmen of Elas to her wedding that will hopefully prevent a war, Kirk eventually falls in love with his rather spoiled passenger after being touched by her aphrodisiac tears. Because, Kirk somehow needed the encouragement.
The Enterprise infected the captain long before the dolmen did.
This is one of those bad stories that I rather enjoy. It's a similar premise we've seen already a few times this season. Here, Kirk is pressured into giving up the Enterprise to a deranged, shape-shifting former Starship captain confined to an asylum. It's one of those episodes where what would have been one act in an episode in previous years is stretched out to an entire episode. Key Luke appears, as does Batgirl Yvonne Craig as Marta, a crazed Orion woman.
I am the most beautiful woman on this planet.
You're the only woman on this planet, you stupid cow.
It started off with good intentions. In the finished episode, the only difference between Beale and Lokai is which side of their body is which colour. Preachy? Yes. Heart in the right place? Yes. Entertaining? Sorta. Frank Gorshin is always great.
Oh, look at me. I am black on the right side. Lokai is white on the right side. All of his people are white on the right side.
It's also the final contribution to Star Trek by Gene Coon.
Destruct sequence 1, code 1, 1A.
Kirk finds himself on an abandoned Enterprise with only a female stranger as company. But really, it's a ruse, you don't say. The planet Gideon is crippled by overpopulation, and their leaders feel the only way to thin out their numbers is to use Kirk to spread a rare disease he recently picked up. Co-writer Stanley Adams had appeared on screen as Cyrano Jones in Trouble with Tribbles. It's easy to remember the third season as all being completely awful. Like how every person from a rival high school is somehow evil. There are more watchable episodes than many of us would care to admit. Lee Merriweather plays the personalised killer drones out to protect an installation on a dead planet. Scotty falls in love with Mira Romaine, as you do, but some alien lights, of Zeta if you will, have other plans. It's not irredeemably awful, but it's nothing special. The most notable thing about the episode is that it was written by children's TV host Shari Lewis and her husband. Lewis had hoped to play Mira Romaine, but it's not clear who Lamb-Chop would have played. An impossibly long-lived man on a remote planet may also have been Leonardo da Vinci and Brahms and others. He's made a female companion robot that Kirk has fallen in love with.
I offer you happiness.
Kirk is so broken up about losing his dead android girlfriend that Spock uses his Vulcan powers to make Kirk forget about her. And also about the $50 he still owed Kirk. It's quite a sluggish episode in general. Infamous, notorious, and other words to describe this dire episode. Dr. Severin and his young followers hijack the Enterprise to take them to the fabled planet Eden. Hey, out there. Hey, out there. The Way to Eden is usually reviled as space hippies made by people who still thought of 50s beatniks as long-haired troublemakers. But really it's all about an anti-science death cult, the sort that would tell McCoy not to cure them of the aging plague or the Psi 2000 virus or whatever. They'd rather just die than be rational. This is more Manson family in Jonestown rather than Summer of Love. Okay, it's weird to see Chekov so uptight when seeing his ex-girlfriend. Even weirder to see Charles Napier rocking out with his Spock out. The story, as originally written by D.C. Fontana, had McCoy's estranged daughter Joanna be one of the death cultists, but it was changed to be Chekov and his ex.
How can you let this go on?
It's a look at the disparity between the idle rich and the working person, something that classic Trek hadn't really touched upon. Miners working underground without masks are being stifled intellectually by gas residue.
We had a bargain. Why did you break it?
Meanwhile, Spock is explaining his sex life to somebody he's just met. Not a great episode, but it's enlivened by Abraham Lincoln turning up in space, with Kirk humouring their guest for a bit before things end up in a battle between a team of good guys, Kirk, Spock, Lincoln and Vulcan hero Surak, against 4 evil people, one of whom is Klingon legend Kahless. It just turns into a shoddy studio-bound version of Arena, fighting each other for the benefit of some giant rock turd creature. Are we cancelled yet? When watching some of the more, how shall we say, abominable third season episodes, I sometimes wonder how the actors reacted to the scripts when they were trying to learn their lines. A planet is about to be destroyed, and so Kirk, Spock and McCoy beam down 5 minutes before the end to check out the place. They find a stroppy librarian and his duplicates and are accidentally sent back into this planet's distant past. Because Spock has travelled back thousands of years, he somehow reverts to a pre-logical Vulcan, which turns out to be horny and bad-tempered.
Are you trying to kill me, Spock?
Kirk's old girlfriend, naturally, uses an alien machine to swap bodies with him. So basically, it's an episode where William Shatner acts like a hysterical woman. Her new boyfriend seems not too concerned at his lover now looking like Shatner. It's ridiculous and a terrible episode, sexist to the extreme.
Your world of starship captains doesn't admit women.
But it's this Melrose Place level silliness with William Shatner really going for it that also makes this a guilty pleasure.
But mutiny is charged and encouragement of mutiny. Dr. McCoy, Mr. Scott, you heard it?
If you do not act, you will be considered equally guilty.
Look, by now, I guess you're all sick to death of me talking about classic Star Trek. You know the drill. Show cancelled, reborn in syndication, fans organise whole convention, Saturday morning animated series, a board have attempted a new live action series which morphs into a feature film. So next time we get together to talk about Star Trek, it will be about their first big screen adventure. That would be released in late 1979. Star Trek the Motion Picture. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe, leave a comment below or check out some of our other videos.